The champagne glass slipped from Marcus Weber's trembling hand, shattering against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club ballroom. 20 years had passed since graduation, but the laughter cutting through the elegant evening air sounded exactly the same as it had in the hallways of Lincoln High School. The same cruel, dismissive laughter that had followed him through 4 years of humiliation. But this time, something was different. This time, the black SUVs pulling into the circular driveway weren't part of his imagination. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Marcus had never intended to attend the reunion. The gold-embossed invitation had sat on his kitchen counter for 3 months, accumulating coffee stains and doubt. 20 years since he'd walked across that stage, diploma in hand, while his classmates whispered about the weird kid who ate lunch alone in the library. 20 years since Jessica Hartwell had laughed when he'd asked her to prom, her friends recording his stammering rejection on their flip phones. But something had changed Marcus Weber's mind that humid Saturday afternoon in August. Maybe it was the letter from the Navy Personnel Command that had arrived that morning, or perhaps it was the photograph his aide had shown him of his old high school, now serving as a polling location. Whatever the reason, Admiral Marcus Weber, commander of the Pacific Fleet, had decided it was time to face his past. The Riverside Country Club buzzed with the energy of middle-aged nostalgia. Balloon arches and school colors, burgundy and gold, framed the entrance while a slideshow of senior photos cycled endlessly on mounted screens. The venue was everything Lincoln High's gymnasium wasn't. Sophisticated, expensive, exclusive. It was exactly the kind of place his former classmates would choose to showcase their success. Marcus arrived alone, having declined his security detail's offer to accompany him inside. He'd traded his dress whites for a simple navy suit, hoping to blend into the crowd. The years had been kind to him. Military discipline had replaced his teenage awkwardness with confident posture, and the California sun had weathered his face into something that commanded respect rather than mockery. But old habits died hard. The moment he stepped through those doors, 17-year-old Marcus Weber stirred somewhere deep in his chest, whispering familiar warnings about humiliation and rejection. Marcus? Marcus Weber. The voice belonged to Tom Henderson, former quarterback and current real estate mogul, judging by his ostentatious Rolex. Holy shit, is that really you? The conversation that followed was predictably stilted. Tom's surprise was genuine. He clearly expected to never see Marcus again, let alone at a reunion. His exchange drew attention, and soon Marcus found himself surrounded by a growing circle of former classmates, each more successful than the last. There was Jennifer Reynolds, now a prominent attorney in Dallas, David Chen, who'd sold his tech startup for $60 million, Sarah Morrison, whose restaurant empire stretched across 3 states, and then there was Jessica Hartwell, now Jessica Hartwell Richmond, whose perfect veneered smile hadn't changed since senior year. "Marcus Weber," she said, her voice carrying that same note of amused condescension he remembered so well. "I honestly never thought I'd see you again. What have you been up to all these years?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around him, phones appeared as if by magic, fingers poised over social media apps. The same impulse that had driven them to record his prom rejection now manifested in Instagram stories and Facebook posts. Some things, Marcus realized, never changed. "I've been serving," he said simply. "Serving?" Chad Brennan laughed, the sound sharp and familiar. Chad had been student body president, quarterback's best friend, the kind of golden boy who'd peaked in high school and spent the next 2 decades trying to recapture that glory. The laughter was polite, but pointed. These were people who measured success in stock portfolios and zip codes, who never understood that some things mattered more than money. Marcus felt that old familiar heat rise in his chest. Not anger exactly, but something deeper. The same feeling he'd carried through boot camp, through officer candidate school, through every deployment when home felt like a foreign country. "Something like that," Marcus replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The conversation moved on, but the undertone remained. His former classmates spoke around him rather than to him, sharing updates about their children's private schools, their vacation homes in Aspen, their latest business acquisitions. When they did include him, it was with the kind of patronizing kindness reserved for charity cases. "We should get a group photo," Jennifer announced, her photographer's instincts still sharp after years of running her successful wedding business. Just like old times. They arranged themselves with the same social hierarchy that had defined their teenage years. Chad at the center, arms draped over the shoulders of his inner circle. The successful ones, the lawyers, the entrepreneurs, the social media influencers, formed the core. Marcus found himself pushed to the edge, just as he had been in every yearbook photo, every group project, every social gathering. "Say cheese, everyone," Jessica called out, her professional camera clicking rapidly. But as the flash fired, Marcus caught sight of something through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. Black vehicles were pulling into the country club's circular drive, not the luxury cars of his classmates, but something else entirely. Government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicles that appeared when important people needed to be somewhere quickly and quietly. He excused himself from the photo session, moving toward the windows with growing curiosity. The vehicles had arranged themselves in a precise formation. 2 suburban SUVs flanking a sleek sedan with a 4th vehicle blocking the exit. Professional, military precision. "Probably some politician," Chad's voice carried across the room. "You know how these rich bastards love their security details." Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his aide. "Admiral, your presence is requested immediately. Situation developing in the South China Sea. Transport is en route." The irony wasn't lost on him. For 4 years of high school, he dreamed of a moment like this, some dramatic revelation that would prove his worth to the people who'd dismissed him. But now, standing in this elegant ballroom, surrounded by his past, Marcus realized he'd stopped needing their validation somewhere between his first command and his 3rd star. He was about to slip away quietly, just as he'd done so many times in high school, when Jessica's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Marcus, where are you going? We haven't even heard about your little serving job yet." The word "little" hung in the air like a slap. Around him, conversations paused as his former classmates sensed drama. Their phones came up again, ready to capture whatever humiliation was about to unfold. The same hungry anticipation that had followed him through 4 years of high school cafeterias and chemistry labs. Marcus turned back to face them, and for just a moment, he saw them as they truly were, not the successful adults they'd become, but the frightened teenagers they'd once been, still desperate to prove their worth by diminishing others. Outside, car doors slammed in precise sequence. Heavy footsteps approached the country club entrance. "You really want to know what I've been doing for the last 20 years?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a new edge that made Jessica's smile falter slightly. The ballroom doors burst open. The ballroom fell silent as 6 Marines in dress blues marched through the entrance in perfect formation. Their movements were crisp, synchronized, the kind of precision that took years to master. The lead Marine, a gunnery sergeant with ribbons covering half his chest, scanned the room with professional intensity before his eyes locked onto Marcus. "Admiral Weber," the Marine announced, his voice carrying across the stunned ballroom. "Your helicopter is standing by, sir. We have a priority alpha situation requiring your immediate attention." The champagne glass slipped from Marcus's hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had frozen the room, and suddenly everyone was moving, talking, reaching for their phones with trembling fingers. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Chad's face had gone pale beneath his artificial tan. Tom Henderson actually took a step backward, as if Marcus's newfound status might be contagious. "Admiral," Jennifer Reynolds whispered, her lawyer's mind apparently struggling to process the information. "As in, Navy Admiral?" Marcus straightened, and suddenly the transformation was complete. The awkward teenager who'd haunted these halls was gone, replaced by a man who commanded nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. His posture shifted, his shoulders squared, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison," he addressed the lead Marine. "Status report."
Sir, Chinese naval forces have moved to within 12 nautical miles of Taiwan. The President has authorized immediate deployment of the 7th Fleet. Admiral Patterson sends his compliments and requests your presence aboard the USS Reagan within the hour. The names meant nothing to Marcus's former classmates, but the gravity of the situation was unmistakable. This wasn't some middle management crisis or quarterly earnings disappointment. This was the kind of decision-making that shaped global politics, the weight of which could be measured in thousands of lives and billions of dollars. Understood, Marcus replied. Give me 2 minutes to gather my effects. He turned back to his classmates, who stood frozen in a tableau of shock and disbelief. The same people who'd spent the last hour treating him like a charity case were now faced with the reality that the quiet kid they'd tormented was quite possibly the most powerful person in the room, possibly the most powerful person they'd ever met. Well, Marcus said, his tone carrying just the slightest hint of amusement. Well, that guess it answers your question about what I've been doing. Sarah Morrison was the first to recover, her business instincts kicking in despite her obvious shock. Marcus, we had no idea. Admiral? That's incredible. How long have you been?
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 22 years in the service, Marcus interrupted gently. Started as an ensign, fresh out of the Naval Academy, worked my way up. The words landed like bombs in the stunned silence. Naval Academy? The same institution that had rejected half their high school's valedictorians? The place where only the best and brightest earned admission, where academic excellence was just the entry fee and real success was measured in leadership, honor, and sacrifice. David Chen, whose tech millions had made him the unofficial king of their graduating class's success stories, stepped forward hesitantly. Marcus, we owe you an apology. We didn't know. No, Marcus cut him off, his voice firm but not unkind. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You assumed. Just like you assumed 20 years ago that the quiet kid reading military history in the library corner wasn't worth your time. The accusation hung in the air, all the more powerful for its quiet delivery. Around them, other reunion attendees had begun to take notice of the commotion. Phones were recording now, capturing not just the moment, but the expressions of dawning realization on familiar faces. Chad finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Military history? You were always reading those books about World War II, Vietnam. Studying, Marcus corrected, learning from the mistakes and victories of those who came before. While you were planning parties and worrying about homecoming court, I was preparing for something that actually mattered. Jessica tried to recover some dignity, her social instincts scrambling for purchase. Marcus, we were just kids. High school was 4 years, Marcus interrupted, his tone growing colder. 20 years ago, but some people never really leave high school, do they? Some people spend their whole lives trying to recreate those glory days, maintaining the same hierarchies, the same cruelties. The indictment was surgical in its precision. Around them, other classmates began to shift uncomfortably, recognizing themselves in his words. The successful ones who still measured their worth by high school achievements, the popular kids who'd never learned to value substance over style, the bullies who traded physical intimidation for social and economic leverage. Admiral Weber? Sir, we really do need to move. The situation is escalating. Marcus nodded, then pulled out his phone. His aide answered on the first ring. Lieutenant Commander Phillips, I need the press liaison officer to prepare a statement, something brief about my attendance at a personal function being interrupted by official duties. Make sure they emphasize that this was a high school reunion. Let them draw their own conclusions. He ended the call and looked back at his former classmates, most of whom were still recording. By tomorrow, this moment would be viral. The story of the high school loser who became an admiral would spread across social media, picked up by news outlets, analyzed by pundits. Some of his classmates would become footnotes in that story, the people who'd failed to recognize greatness when it sat beside them in algebra class. Marcus, Tom Henderson stepped forward, his real estate mogul confidence completely evaporated. We're proud of you, man. Really. What you've accomplished. Are you? Marcus asked quietly.
Because 30 minutes ago you were laughing about my little serving job, assuming I was waiting tables somewhere, barely scraping by. Does my service only matter to you now that you know my rank, now that you understand the scope of my responsibility? The question cut deep, because they all knew the answer. Their respect was conditional, tied to status and recognition, rather than character or sacrifice. They dismissed him not because he'd failed, but because his success didn't fit their narrow definition of achievement. The Marine checked his watch. "Admiral, we really must go." Marcus straightened his tie and looked around the ballroom one last time. The decorations seemed smaller now, the whole event diminished by the weight of real-world concerns. These people were still trapped in their high school bubble, measuring success by material accumulation and social media followers. They'd never understand the satisfaction of service, the honor of sacrifice, the profound responsibility of protecting others. "I need to go," he said simply. "Duty calls." As he moved toward the exit, flanked by the Marines, conversations erupted throughout the ballroom. His former classmates were already crafting their versions of events, their social media posts, their claims of lifelong friendship with the Admiral. Within hours, they'd be telling anyone who'd listen about their close relationship with Marcus Weber, conveniently forgetting 20 years of indifference.
But Marcus was already mentally aboard the helicopter, focused on the crisis unfolding in the South China Sea. The reunion, his former classmates, even his own vindication, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the weight of command. At the ballroom entrance, he paused and turned back one final time. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I forgave all of you years ago. The question you need to ask yourselves is whether you can forgive yourselves for who you chose to be." The Marines held the door as Admiral Marcus Weber walked out of his past and into his destiny. The helicopter's rotors were already spinning when Marcus emerged from the country club, the downdraft sending napkins and programs swirling across the manicured lawn. A CH-53E Super Stallion sat on the club's golf course, its massive frame dwarfing the perfectly maintained greens. Golf carts had been hastily moved aside, and country club staff stood at a respectful distance, their faces filled with the kind of awe reserved for witnessing history in motion. Marcus climbed aboard without looking back, but through the aircraft's windows, he could see his former classmates pressing against the ballroom's glass doors, phones raised, capturing footage they'd share for years to come. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, banking east toward Naval Air Station North Island, where his command helicopter waited to ferry him to the USS Ronald Reagan. Below, San Diego's sprawling suburbs gave way to the Pacific Ocean, its surface glinting like hammered metal in the setting sun. Marcus had made this flight countless times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he carried the weight of 2 decades with him, not just the responsibility of command, but the strange closure of facing ghosts he'd thought were long buried. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Patterson. Chinese formation includes 2 Type 055 destroyers, 4 Type 052D destroyers, and a nuclear submarine. Taiwan has requested immediate support. POTS authorization confirmed. Welcome back to the show, Marcus. The stakes were crystal clear. This wasn't a training exercise or diplomatic posturing. The Chinese had moved their most advanced warships into position, a clear escalation that demanded immediate response. The 7th Fleet's movement would be watched by every intelligence service in the world, analyzed by military experts, and potentially become the opening chapter of a larger conflict. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood on the flight deck of the USS Ronald Reagan, the nuclear-powered supercarrier that served as the floating embodiment of American naval power in the Pacific. The ship's crew of 5,000 moved with practiced efficiency around him, preparing for deployment under combat conditions. Fighter jets were being armed and fueled, helicopters readied for reconnaissance missions, and the ship's advanced radar systems painted a real-time picture of Chinese naval movements 90 miles away. Captain Raymond Foster, the Reagan's commanding officer, met Marcus at the island's superstructure. Admiral were at DEFCON 2 and ready to engage. The Chinese formation is holding position just outside Taiwanese territorial waters, but their submarine has gone dark.
Our sonar teams lost contact 40 minutes ago. Marcus studied the tactical display, his mind processing dozens of variables simultaneously: water depth, weather conditions, submarine capabilities, political ramifications of various response options. This was what 22 years of training had prepared him for. Not the social dynamics of high school reunions, but life and death decisions that could reshape the global balance of power. His status of the Taiwan Navy, he asked. 4 frigates and 2 submarines deployed, but they're outgunned 3-1. Their newest vessel is 15 years old. They're brave, but they need us if this goes hot. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Here was another David and Goliath scenario, but this time, the stakes were measured in human lives rather than social humiliation. Taiwan's small but determined navy faced overwhelming odds against a superpower's modern fleet, just as he had once faced the overwhelming social hierarchy of Lincoln High School. But there was a crucial difference. Taiwan had allies. They had the 7th Fleet, the most powerful naval force ever assembled, ready to stand with them against impossible odds. Marcus had faced his battles alone. His phone rang, not the secure line, but his personal cell. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar: San Diego. Admiral Weber speaking. Marcus, it's Jennifer Reynolds. Jennifer from high school. I need to apologize. Marcus stepped away from the tactical displays, finding a quiet corner of the bridge. Around him, the controlled chaos of naval operations continued. Sailors manning battle stations, officers coordinating with other ships in the fleet, intelligence analysts updating threat assessments. Through the bridge windows, Marcus could see the lights of other ships in the fleet: destroyers, cruisers, submarines, all moving into position like pieces on a massive chessboard. Each vessel represented hundreds of sailors, young men and women who'd chosen service over comfort, duty over personal gain.
I became a lawyer because I thought it would make me important, Jennifer continued. I make partner, I drive a BMW, I live in the right neighborhood. But what you do, what you've chosen to do with your life, it actually matters. You protect people. You serve something bigger than yourself. Jennifer, no, let me finish. I looked you up after you left. Your service record, your deployments, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Afghanistan, anti-piracy operations off Somalia. You've spent your entire adult life in harm's way, protecting people like us who sit at home and complain about things that don't really matter. Marcus watched a squadron of FA-18 Super Hornets taxi into position on the flight deck below. Each pilot was someone's son or daughter, trained to fly billion-dollar aircraft into combat zones most people couldn't even imagine. They were no older than his classmates had been when they'd graduated, but they'd chosen a path of sacrifice and service. I need to go, Jennifer. There's a situation developing. I know. It's on the news. CNN is running footage from the reunion, calling it From Zero to Hero, the Admiral's Revenge. They're making it sound like some kind of movie. Of course they were. The media loved a simple narrative, and his story fit perfectly into their preferred framework, the underdog's triumphant return. They'd completely missed the real point, that service itself was the reward, not the recognition that came with it. Marcus? Jennifer's voice was softer now, more vulnerable than he'd ever heard it. Is there anything, can we do anything to support you? To support what you're doing out there? It was a genuine question, the first authentic moment he'd shared with any of his former classmates in 2 decades. For just a moment, Marcus glimpsed the person Jennifer might have been if high school's toxic social dynamics hadn't shaped her into someone who measured worth by status symbols and social hierarchies. There is something, Marcus said, quietly. Remember tonight. Remember that service matters more than success, that character matters more than career achievements, that the quiet kid in the corner might be preparing for something you can't even imagine. I will, Jennifer promised. We all will. Marcus ended the call and rejoined his staff at the tactical display.
The Chinese submarine had surfaced briefly 60 miles northeast of Taiwan, just long enough to confirm its position before diving again. It was a message, a demonstration that China had the capability to strike from underwater, invisible and deadly. Admiral, Captain Foster approached with new intelligence reports. Satellite imagery shows additional Chinese naval assets leaving port. This could be bigger than we initially thought. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting fully into operational mode. The reunion, his former classmates, even Jennifer's apology, all of it receded into the background as the weight of command settled onto his shoulders. Thousands of sailors looked to him for leadership. Millions of Taiwanese citizens depended on his decisions. The balance of power in the Pacific hung in the balance. But as the USS Ronald Reagan turned toward Taiwan, cutting through the Pacific swells at flank speed, Marcus carried with him a strange sense of completion. He'd finally answered the question that had haunted him since graduation. What happened to the quiet kid who'd sat alone in the library, dreaming of something greater than the petty cruelties of adolescence? The answer was steaming toward the horizon at 30 knots, ready to face whatever came next. The encrypted communication from Washington arrived at 0347 hours, transmitted through channels so secure that only 12 people in the world had access to the frequency. Marcus stood in the USS Ronald Reagan's Combat Information Center, surrounded by glowing screens that tracked every vessel, aircraft, and missile within a 1,000-mile radius. The message was brief but decisive. Chinese submarine has launched torpedoes at Taiwanese frigate. Rules of engagement authorized, weapons free. The war had begun. All stations, this is Admiral Weber. Marcus's voice carried through the ship's communication system to 5,000 sailors. As of 0345 hours, Chinese forces have fired upon Taiwanese naval vessels. We are now in active combat operations. This is not a drill. All hands to battle stations. The transformation was instantaneous. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red as sailors sprinted to their positions. In the hangar bay, aircraft mechanics worked with desperate efficiency to arm and fuel fighter jets. On the flight deck, catapult crews prepared to launch the first combat sorties the Pacific Fleet had seen since Operation Desert Storm. Marcus watched the tactical display update in real time. The Taiwanese frigate ROCS Chang'an had taken a torpedo strike to her port side and was listing badly, but her crew was fighting to save the ship. 3 Chinese destroyers were closing in for the kill, their targeting radars already locked onto the wounded vessel. It was a slaughter in the making, unless the 7th Fleet intervened immediately. "Launch all available aircraft," Marcus ordered. "Target the Chinese formation, but hold fire until they commit to attacking the rescue vessels. I want every submarine in the theater moved to intercept positions, and get me a direct line to Admiral Liu V aboard the Chinese flagship."
The order surprised his staff. Captain Foster stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Admiral, respectfully, the Chinese commander isn't likely to take your call in the middle of a combat operation." "He will," Marcus replied with quiet confidence. "Liu Wei and I served together on a joint anti-piracy task force off Somalia 8 years ago. He's a professional, not a fanatic. If there's a way to de-escalate this without it becoming World War III, he'll take it." The communication came through on an open military frequency that both navies monitored. Admiral Liu's voice, speaking heavily accented English, crackled through the static. "Admiral Weber, I was wondering when the famous Marcus Weber would show his face. I heard you were at a school reunion when we began our operation. How very American of you to prioritize social events over military intelligence." Despite the gravity of the situation, Marcus almost smiled. Liu Wei's dry wit had been legendary during their joint operations, even when they'd been hunting Somali parrots together. The man was brilliant, educated at both the Chinese Naval Academy and Oxford, and possessed the kind of strategic mind that made him extremely dangerous. "Liu Wei, you always did have interesting timing, but firing torpedoes at rescue vessels crosses every line in the Geneva Conventions. Order your ships to stand down and allow medical evacuations." "I'm afraid that's not possible, old friend. My government has very clear instructions regarding Taiwan's provocative military exercises. Any vessel that refuses to leave our territorial waters will be treated as hostile." "Taiwanese territorial waters, you mean?" "I think we both know that's a matter of perspective." The diplomatic chess match was playing out over open channels, which meant intelligence services from dozens of countries were recording every word. Marcus's next response would be analyzed by military strategists, political scientists, and historians for decades to come. The weight of that knowledge sat heavily on his shoulders as he formulated his reply. Leo Wei, we both remember the merchant vessel MV Golden Phoenix, Somali pirates, 15 hostages, including 2 children. You and I coordinated a joint rescue operation that saved every life aboard that ship. We didn't ask about nationality or politics then, we just did what was right. There was a long pause on the frequency. Around Marcus, the Combat Information Center held its collective breath. On the tactical display, Chinese destroyers continued their advance toward the crippled Taiwanese frigate, but their speed had decreased slightly. Leo Wei was thinking, weighing his options. That was different, Leo Wei replied. Pirates are not a sovereign government exercising legitimate territorial claims. And children drowning in the South China Sea aren't political statements. They're human beings who deserve a chance to live. The Taiwanese frigate was taking on water rapidly now, her crew launching life rafts as the ship's list grew more pronounced. Marcus could see the thermal signatures of sailors in the water, small bright dots scattered across the dark ocean. Some of them weren't much older than the high school students he'd once been, young people who'd chosen service over safety and now faced death in the cold Pacific. His secure phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Admiral, this is David Chen from the reunion. I'm watching CNN. My daughter is in the Navy, stationed in Japan. Her name is Lieutenant Amy Chen, USS Fitzgerald. Please bring our kids home safe. The message hit Marcus like a physical blow. David Chen, the tech millionaire who'd looked down on him just hours earlier, had a daughter serving in the very fleet Marcus commanded. The abstract concepts of duty and sacrifice suddenly had a face, a name, a desperate father's plea. More messages began arriving on his phone. Sarah Morrison's son was a Marine stationed in Okinawa. Tom Henderson's nephew flew Navy helicopters. Even Chad Brennan had a daughter at the Naval Academy. The same classmates who dismissed military service as unimportant now had children wearing the uniform, standing ready to fight in a war that was unfolding in real time. Admiral, Captain Foster interrupted urgently, a Chinese submarine is moving to the torpedo range of our destroyer USS Wayne E. Mayer. Request permission to engage. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus could order the attack that would sink the Chinese submarine and potentially save American lives, but that same order would also escalate a regional conflict into a global war, drawing in allies and enemies across the Pacific Rim. Millions of lives hung in the balance of his next decision. Negative, Marcus replied. Signal the Mayor to take evasive action, but do not fire unless fired upon. Sir, that submarine could sink one of our ships. I said negative, Captain. Marcus keyed his radio one more time. Leo Wei, I'm sending 2 rescue helicopters to evacuate the Taiwanese sailors from the water. My aircraft will not be armed, and they will not enter within 5 miles of your formation. But if any of your vessels fire on those rescue birds, I will consider it an act of war against the United States Navy. The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like hours. On the tactical display, the Chinese formation held its position while American helicopters lifted off from the Reagan's deck, racing toward the survivors scattered across the dark ocean. Leo Wei's voice finally crackled through the radio. Admiral Weber, your helicopters will not be molested during their rescue operations, but after the survivors are recovered, this area will be considered a combat zone. I suggest you withdraw your forces to avoid further complications. Understood, Admiral Liu. And Leo Wei, thank you. Do not mistake tactical restraint for weakness, Marcus. Next time, I may not be so accommodating. The frequency went silent as Marcus watched his helicopters reach the first group of survivors. On infrared cameras, he could see Navy rescue swimmers dropping into the frigid water, pulling exhausted sailors from life rafts and debris fields. Each rescue was a small victory, a life saved in the midst of larger geopolitical forces that threatened to spin out of control. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Jennifer Reynolds. Marcus, the whole country is watching. We're all proud of you. Thank you for serving. For the first time since leaving the reunion, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. Hours ago, these same people had dismissed his service as insignificant.
Now they were watching him navigate the most dangerous naval confrontation since the Cuban Missile Crisis, their own children's lives potentially hanging in the balance of his decisions. The rescue helicopters were heading home, carrying 17 Taiwanese sailors who would see their families again because two old adversaries had chosen restraint over revenge. It wasn't the kind of victory that would make headlines or earn medals, but it was the kind that let Marcus sleep at night. The real test was still coming. The call from the Pentagon came at 0415 hours, patched directly through to Marcus's secure terminal in the Admiral's quarters aboard the USS Ronald Reagan. Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawkins appeared on the encrypted video feed, her face grave in the harsh lighting of the Situation Room. Behind her, Marcus could see the shadowy figures of Joint Chiefs Staff and National Security Council members. Secretary Hawkins said without preamble, "Admiral Weber, I need to know your assessment of the current situation. The President is considering escalation options, and your technical input is crucial." Marcus studied the woman who'd risen from Army colonel to the highest civilian position in the Defense Department. Patricia Hawkins was known for her direct approach and strategic brilliance, but more importantly, she was someone who understood the true cost of military action. "Madam Secretary, Admiral Li Wei is operating under strict political constraints from Beijing. This engagement was carefully orchestrated to test our response without triggering full-scale conflict. He's given us an opportunity to de-escalate if we're smart about it. The Joint Chiefs are recommending a show of force, move the entire 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait, demonstrate overwhelming superiority." "That would be a mistake," Marcus replied firmly. "Liu Wei has 8 nuclear submarines in theater that we haven't detected yet. A massive fleet movement would force his hand militarily and give the hardliners in Beijing justification for broader action. We'd be playing into their strategy." On the secure channel, he could hear murmured discussions in the background. The president was being briefed in real time, weighing options that could reshape the global balance of power. Meanwhile, Marcus was receiving constant updates from his fleet commanders, tracking Chinese movements across hundreds of miles of ocean. "Admiral, what do you recommend?" Secretary Hawkins asked. "Surgical precision over overwhelming force. I have assets in position to neutralize the immediate threat while leaving Liu Wei room to withdraw with dignity intact. But I need complete operational authority for the next 6 hours." The request was unprecedented. Marcus was essentially asking for carte blanche to conduct military operations without direct oversight from Washington. In peacetime, such a request would be immediately denied. But with Chinese and American naval forces facing off in one of the world's most strategic waterways, normal protocols were proving inadequate. "Stand by, Admiral." The screen went dark as Secretary Hawkins consulted with the president's team. Marcus used the pause to review intelligence reports that painted an increasingly complex picture. Chinese forces weren't just positioned near Taiwan, they were implementing a carefully coordinated strategy across the entire Pacific theater. Submarines were moving toward Guam, surface vessels were approaching Japanese waters, and intelligence suggested additional forces were mobilizing from mainland ports. His personal phone buzzed with another message, this one from an international number. The text was simple. "Uncle Marcus, this is your nephew Jake. I'm a helicopter pilot with the Marines stationed on Okinawa. Mom told me about tonight. Just wanted you to know we're ready for whatever comes next. Semper Fi."
Marcus stared at the message, his mind reeling. Jake, his sister's son, whom he'd barely seen since joining the Navy 22 years ago. The boy who'd once built model aircraft carriers and Marcus's childhood bedroom was now flying combat missions in the same theater where Marcus commanded the fleet. The personal cost of his long service was suddenly crystallized in that single text message. The secure line chimed as Secretary Hawkins returned to the feed. "Admiral Weber, you have full operational authority for the next 6 hours. The President wants this resolved without American casualties, if possible, but he's authorized whatever action you deem necessary to protect our allies and interests." "Understood, Madam Secretary. I'll keep you informed of developments." Marcus terminated the connection and immediately summoned his senior staff to the Combat Information Center. The massive space buzzed with controlled intensity as dozens of specialists tracked friendly and hostile forces across multiple displays. Captain Foster approached with updated intelligence reports. "Admiral, we've identified the Chinese submarine that torpedoed the Taiwanese frigate, SSN 417, a Type 093 attack boat commanded by Captain Wang Jian.
Intelligence indicates Wang is considered a rising star in the Chinese Navy, very aggressive, politically connected. Where is she now? Lost contact 40 minutes ago, but sonar analysis suggests she's moved to within torpedo range of the Taiwanese rescue ships. If Wang fires on the hospital vessels, the implication hung unspoken in the air. Attacking medical ships would be a war crime that would force American retaliation and make de-escalation impossible. Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the positions of his own submarines and surface vessels. The USS Virginia, one of America's most advanced attack submarines, was positioned less than 2 miles from Wang's last known location. "Get me Commander Sarah Valdez on the Virginia," Marcus ordered. Commander Valdez appeared on the video link within seconds, her lean face set with determination. Marcus had personally recommended her for submarine command 2 years earlier, recognizing in her the same quiet competence he'd once possessed as a young officer. Now she was positioned to make decisions that could prevent or precipitate a global conflict. "Commander, I need you to shadow the Chinese submarine, but do not engage unless they fire on medical vessels. Your rules of engagement are to protect the rescue operation at all costs." "Understood, Admiral. What if the Chinese boat tries to surface?" "Let them. But if Captain Wang so much as opens a torpedo tube door near those hospital ships, you are authorized to send him to the bottom." The Virginia vanished from surface radar as she dove to intercept the Chinese submarine. Marcus watched her disappear into the dark Pacific depths, carrying with her the hopes of 17 rescued Taiwanese sailors and the weight of preventing World War III. His secure phone rang again, this time with a call from Admiral Liu Wei himself, transmitted through Chinese naval communications directly to Marcus's personal line. The breach of protocol was unprecedented, suggesting Liu Wei was operating outside normal command structures. "Marcus, we need to talk privately. Can you secure this line?" "It's secure, Liu Wei. What's your situation?" "My political officers are pushing for escalation. They want me to sink one of your destroyers to demonstrate Chinese resolve. I have maybe 30 minutes before they override my tactical judgment." The admission was stunning. Liu Wei was essentially confessing that he had lost control of his own forces, that political commissars were now driving military decisions. It explained the torpedo attack on the Taiwanese frigate, not a tactical decision, but a political gesture designed to provoke American response. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked. "Give me something I can report as a victory. A tactical withdrawal by American forces, acknowledgement of Chinese territorial claims, anything that lets me tell Beijing we've achieved our objectives." Marcus considered the request carefully. Liu Wei was offering him a face-saving exit from a crisis that could spiral into nuclear conflict, but accepting would effectively abandon Taiwan to Chinese aggression and signal American weakness throughout the Pacific region. "I can't give you Taiwan, Liu Wei, but I can give you something else." "What?" "The submarine that's been shadowing your formation, USS Virginia, is in position to sink your Type 093. Commander Valdez has firing solutions on your Captain Wang right now. If I order her to surface and withdraw, you can report that Chinese naval superiority forced American submarines to retreat."
The lie was masterful in its simplicity. Liu Wei could claim tactical victory while avoiding the catastrophic escalation that would follow if Huang actually fired on medical vessels. Both commanders would save face, and the rescued sailors would make it home to their families. "Your submarine commander surface voluntarily?" "She will if I order it. But Liu Wei, if any of your vessels fire on rescue ships or medical personnel, all bets are off. Virginia will sink Huang's boat, and you know I have enough firepower in theater to turn this into a very bad day for the People's Liberation Army Navy." The line was quiet for nearly a minute as Liu Wei considered the offer. In the background, Marcus could hear the controlled chaos of the Chinese flagship's bridge, voices speaking rapidly in Mandarin as tactical situations developed across the theater. "Agreed," Liu Wei finally said. "Order your submarine to surface in 10 minutes. I'll report that aggressive Chinese naval action forced American withdrawal from our territorial waters." "Liu Wei, thank you. You just saved a lot of lives on both sides." "Don't thank me yet, Marcus. This is just the first move in a much larger game. Next time, the politicians may not give us room to maneuver." The connection ended, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of command
and the strange satisfaction of preventing a war through strategic deception. Sometimes the greatest victories were the ones that never made the history books. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the rose garden of the White House, the late September sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. President Harrison approached the podium as cameras from every major news network recorded the ceremony. The president's words carried across the gathered crowd of military officials, foreign dignitaries, and families of servicemen and women. Admiral Marcus Weber's strategic leadership during the Taiwan Strait crisis prevented what could have been a catastrophic escalation into global conflict. Through tactical brilliance and diplomatic courage, he saved countless lives while maintaining America's commitment to our Pacific allies. The Distinguished Service Medal felt heavier than expected as President Harrison placed it around Marcus's neck. The weight wasn't from the golden ribbon, but from the knowledge of what the award represented. Not just his actions, but the actions of thousands of sailors, Marines, and airmen who trusted his judgment in those critical hours. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus was surprised to see familiar faces in the crowd. Jennifer Reynolds stood near the back, wearing a conservative business suit, her expression serious and respectful. Beside her were Tom Henderson, David Chen, and even Chad Brennan, all looking distinctly out of place among the military brass and Washington elite. After the formal reception, Marcus found himself face-to-face with his former classmates for the second time in 3 weeks. But this meeting felt different. The nervous energy and forced smiles of the reunion had been replaced by something approaching genuine respect. Marcus, David Chen stepped forward first, his voice lacking the casual dismissiveness from their last encounter. My daughter Amy called me from the USS Fitzgerald. She said you personally ensured her ship stayed out of the most dangerous positions during the crisis. She wanted me to thank you. Lieutenant Chen is an excellent officer. She earned her position through merit, not favoritism. Still, David insisted, you could have used her ship differently. You protected our kids while putting yourself in harm's way. That means something. Chad Brennan, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. His usual swagger was completely absent, replaced by something Marcus had never seen from him before: humility. I owe you an apology, Chad said quietly. Not just for the reunion, but for everything. High school, the way we treated you. I've been thinking about it every day since that night. Chad? No, let me finish. My daughter Emma is a sophomore at the Naval Academy. When she called me after the crisis, she told me about Admiral Marcus Weber, this legendary naval officer all the midshipmen look up to. She had no idea I knew you. When I told her we went to high school together, she asked what you were like back then. Chad paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't admit that we treated a future admiral like garbage because he was quiet and smart and didn't fit our stupid social hierarchy. So I lied. I told her you were always destined for greatness, that we all knew you'd do something important. The admission hung in the air between them. Marcus studied Chad's face, seeing not the arrogant teenager who'd tormented him, but a middle-aged father grappling with the weight of his own failures. Your daughter doesn't need to know about high school politics, Marcus said gently. What matters is who she chooses to become. Jennifer stepped forward, holding a tablet computer. Marcus, there's something else. After the reunion, after everything that happened, we started talking, really talking about what we'd become, about the choices we'd made.
She turned the tablet toward him, revealing a website with a simple but elegant design. The header read, The Weber Foundation, supporting military families in crisis. We pooled our resources, Tom Henderson explained. David's tech expertise, my real estate connections, Jennifer's legal knowledge, Sarah's restaurant management experience. Even Chad contributed his marketing firm services. The foundation provides emergency financial assistance to military families dealing with deployment hardships, medical crises, educational expenses, Jennifer continued. We've already helped 43 families in just 3 weeks. Marcus stared at the website. genuinely moved by the gesture. These were the same people who'd dismissed his service as unimportant just weeks earlier, now dedicating their professional skills to supporting military families. "There's more," David added, pulling out his phone. "We've been in contact with other classmates, people who couldn't make it to the reunion. The foundation has raised over $2 million already." "Why?" Marcus asks simply. "Because we finally understand what service means," Sarah Morrison answered, stepping forward from the group. "Not just military service, but real service, putting other people's needs before your own. You've been doing it your whole adult life, and we've been playing social media games and chasing status symbols." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young woman in navy dress whites. Lieutenant Amy Chen saluted smartly before speaking. "Admiral Weber, I wanted to personally thank you for your leadership during the crisis. The crew of the Fitzgerald knows we're alive because of the decisions you made." Marcus returned the salute, then extended his hand. "Lieutenant Chen, your father tells me you're considering submarine service." "Yes, sir. I want to command my own boat someday, like you did." "Then remember this. Command isn't about the authority to give orders. It's about the responsibility to make decisions that other people have to live with, sometimes die with. Never forget that weight." "I won't, sir." As Lieutenant Chen departed, Marcus turned back to his former classmates. The afternoon sun was setting behind the Washington Monument, casting the entire scene in golden light. "The foundation is a good start," he told them. "But don't do it because you feel guilty about high school. Do it because it's the right thing to do." "We will," Jennifer promised. "And Marcus, we're sorry it took us 20 years to see what was always there." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology without fanfare. He'd learned long ago that holding grudges was a luxury military officers couldn't afford. There were always more important battles to fight, more crucial decisions to make. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Patterson. "Marcus, we have a situation developing in the Baltic Sea. Russian naval exercises are getting a little too close to NATO shipping lanes. How soon can you be in Norfolk?" Marcus smiled, showing the message to his former classmates. "Duty calls again." "Go," Chad said, extending his hand for the first time since high school. "And Marcus, thank you for serving. Thank you for protecting us, even when we didn't deserve it." As Marcus walked toward his waiting car, he reflected on the strange circularity of life. 20 years ago, he'd left Lincoln High School as an outsider, dismissed and forgotten by his peers. Tonight, he was leaving the White House as a decorated admiral, respected by those same people who'd once considered him worthless. But the real victory wasn't their changed opinion of him. The real victory was that he'd never needed their validation to become the person he was meant to be. Service had been its own reward, duty its own honor. His phone rang as the car pulled away from the White House. The caller ID showed a familiar number, Admiral Li Wei, calling from somewhere in the South China Sea. "Hello, Li Wei. Marcus, I wanted you to know Beijing is officially crediting our tactical victory in the Taiwan Strait as a successful demonstration of Chinese naval power. My political officers are satisfied." "And unofficially?" "Unofficially, 17 Taiwanese sailors went home to their families because two old friends chose wisdom over warfare. Sometimes the victories that matter most are the ones nobody ever hears about." As his car headed toward Andrews Air Force Base, Marcus Weber, the quiet kid from Lincoln High School who'd once eaten lunch alone in the library, prepared for his next mission. Behind him, the lights of the White House faded into the Washington night, but ahead lay the endless horizon of service, duty, and the knowledge that some battles were worth fighting not for glory, but for the simple privilege of protecting others. The reunion was finally over. The real work continued.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.